You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster Podcast. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the iHeartRadio app, or your preferred podcast platform. Enjoy.
Listen, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but in the United States of America, no one really cares about hockey. You know, the old joke is every town has 20,000 hockey fans. They all have season tickets. So the arenas are always sold out, but the TV ratings don't do anything. So it's not one of the four major team sports, although it has a strong, I don't know how else to describe it, cult following in this country. Obviously in Canada, it's number one. But this is where the money is.
I've never heard that joke before, Max.
Have you been to Sunrise, Florida? I don't think there's 20,000 people there.
I disagree with him on the forefront here, guys, as well. I mean, I just grew up in hockey. The NHL certainly was always respected as like a top four sport overall. Pretty much the hierarchy here is NFL, NBA, MLB have kind of like switched spots over the years. And then NHL is kind of born mid in that four hole. It's pretty much been consistently number four. You would hope, obviously, you guys as big hockey fans to try and elevate its status in America, but it is what it is. Maybe, who knows, if baseball decides to hold out an entire 2020, that might be a possibility. But Annie, I want you to take the ball and roll with this one. What do you think of Max's take?
It's hard to take anything that man says seriously outside of boxing and MMA. I mean, the guy has had awful this is the guy that said Larry Fitzgerald is not a Hall of Famer. That Kawhi is more clutch than Kobe. Sorry. Kobe, my guy. I will defend him till my dying day. But as far as this take goes, for one, growing up in Southern California, I have heard this time and time again about my own fan base, that no one cares about hockey in California, which could not be further from the truth. I mean, you go and I'll defend my crosstown rivals, the Los Angeles Kings, as well. You go to any Ducks or Kings game and they know their hockey. They're not just showing up and, not knowing the rules or anything. And they're knowledgeable about the entire league too. Max has to say these things for ratings. I understand. Stephen A's got his point, and then Max usually takes the dumb one. I know how that works. But what would be number 4 is my question. If hockey's not in the top 4, MLS? No. Golf? No.
Bring it back down there. Bring it back down there.
I'm trying. I can't.
Keep going.
He aggravates me in so many ways.
Gio, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of like what Annie said. I mean, what would the 4th major sport be? I mean, if we really want to talk about the National Hockey League and the original 6, there's only 2 Canadian teams. You had Chicago, you had Detroit, you had New York, and you had Boston. I mean, so you had 4 teams in the United States already there. Massachusetts, massive hockey state. Minnesota, massive hockey state. Annie, you mentioned California. A couple episodes ago, we on FaceOff, we talked to Patrick O'Brien Dempsey, who played Mike Eruzione in the movie Miracle. He lives in California now.
That's a shameless plug, guys.
Yeah, shameless plug. We asked him about the state of hockey in California, and he's closer to Los Angeles, so he goes to a lot of Kings games, and he says, when the team's doing well, the team's winning, they love it. And we even brought up how Wayne Gretzky was traded, not specifically, but there was a major reason he got traded to Los Angeles was to boost hockey in California. And I kind of want to attribute that to my boy Austin Matthews. If it wasn't for hockey growing in the U.S., the Toronto Maple Leafs here in Canada, their poster boy is an American hockey player. So I don't really understand. I mean, I think it was the Winter Classic. It was Dallas, Nashville. Don't hold me to this, but it's the Cotton Bowl is down there.
At the Cotton Bowl,
so that's had it. 70,000 fans sold out.
83,000.
83, even better. That's Dallas and Nashville, 2 places where people probably would think that's not the biggest hockey market. And you always look at Nashville's playoff run a couple years ago. Massive turnout. Dallas Stars, they were awesome in the late 90s, early 2000s. They had Mike Modano, one of the best American-born players ever, played for Dallas. So yeah, like Max, maybe you took a couple shots to the head when you were sparring for boxing or something, but it's easily in the top 4 major sports. MLS, they've been around a long time, but soccer, it's not that big here in Canada and the United States. I mean, come on, Max, get your head out of the gutter. The NHL, they're doing their best. We brought up on our show again today, the Bruins Blues Game 7 Stanley Cup Final had the highest ratings in television in the last decade for a Stanley Cup game or a hockey game. So I'm going to say it again, Max, get your head out of the gutter.
Yeah, and Gio, sorry for correcting you on that number. I got to go to the Winter Classic this year, which was amazing.
Awesome.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah, we were kind of talking before we started recording. I don't watch any other sports besides hockey, and I know a little bit about college football. So I don't know Max like y'all know Max. I don't like him, so I guess I'm a part of the club.
I'm not missing anything.
Yeah. Well, and he specifically said team sport, and that's what totally threw me off was what other, and yeah, we mentioned soccer, but I know one person out of everyone I know in my life that watches soccer regularly. No one else except for the when the World Cup comes around or the Olympics. Knowing hockey fans, and I love that we're talking about California. I went to San Jose and Anaheim in a weekend at the beginning of the season, and some of the most passionate and committed fans I have ever seen. And Vegas too, which you wouldn't think of as a hockey market. Sure, tourism, but not hockey, and that's hometown people. It's just our community is so passionate. It's so excited. And hockey, it's, these players don't just walk onto a rink one day and they're a hockey player like some football or basketball people might be. They don't pick it up until high school or something. These guys dedicate most of their lives to it. That takes a lot out of your life. That takes a lot of passion and strength. And we as fans have that too. So I don't know where he's getting that we're not top four, in the top four in the United States, especially Gio made another good point. The original 6, 4 of them were in the United States. We have, how many Canada teams are there compared to American teams?
7.
Thank you. And another one coming to America next year.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what he's talking about. And yeah, y'all, he is there to create an argument or create a conversation. He just really, yeah. And we could also go into another conversation how the NHL should be better with their marketing. I feel like if they were better at marketing themselves and teams marketed themselves better, there would be bigger turnouts or better TV ratings. Also, I don't have TV. I buy the NHL package and that's it. So that might have something to do with it too, how cable TV is out and apps and streaming services are in. So
yeah, so Max doesn't even see a rating, so he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think what really definitely dug him into the hole right there was, like you said, when he mentioned team. We had this debate like when Dana first announced Fight Island and what was going to happen there. Well, UFC is in this unique position where it can elevate itself in terms of the sports hierarchy, but that's an individual sport, individual combat sport. And it's hard to equate kind of like a natural television rating to how the NHL structures it and everything, pay-per-view buys versus like stuff that's free on TV, other than, of course, if you have the NHL package. The only other thing I could think of, and this is like if we're going away from professional sports, I believe there's still obviously an amateur element to this one, is if he was to say like college football. If he was to defend this take, which I don't think he will, he could say in theory like a college football, maybe a top 4 sport in America as opposed to hockey, just because football here is just, it's the top dog, like regardless of who's playing. My thing on college football would be it's very regional. SEC has dominated for years there. Pretty much we're so used to Alabama against Clemson at this point that it's just like a expected event. It's like Christmas seeing Alabama versus Clemson in early January. So that's one of the biggest problems that's facing college football. In terms of hockey, it's interesting how many unique markets have come out of the woodwork over the last few years to compete for that cup. Vegas was just in the Stanley Cup Finals a couple of years ago. St. Louis just took home, I believe, their first in franchise history, if I'm not mistaken?
It was their first cup, but it's their 4th Stanley Cup Finals appearance. They lost 3 in a row back in the early 70s when they first started.
Yeah, so a ton of markets have really come out. Los Angeles was just in the finals a few years back as well. Annie's Ducks in the mid-2000s. Obviously, Crosby, the Penguins have been kind of around that finals mix the last few. And then who knows? Maybe the Maple Leafs can actually turn some heads this year. But
yeah, well, Elena brought it up. I mean, there's only 7 teams here in Canada, but the Cup hasn't been in Canada since 1993.
Exactly.
So an American team has won it. It's stayed south of the border. And me and my co-host, we get into this all the time about seeing a Canadian team win the Stanley Cup and all that. But it goes by the city, and we're just outnumbered. It's a fact. So
something that you mentioned, like in your first kind of like when we're talking about the previous subject, was you played high school like hockey. That was just a part of like sponsored public school sports when you were coming up. And I do think that's probably like one of the biggest like gaps between, Americans and the sport of hockey, because we don't necessarily have it. I'm sure some markets may have like public school sponsored hockey, but at least growing up in New Mexico myself, I never saw it. I am not familiar with any schools that have their own hockey program for their like high school. So I think that's probably maybe like one of those other things why hockey hasn't been necessarily ingratiated to an American audience in quite the same way. particularly at the youth level. And I don't really know what could really bridge that, because I think one conversation we had with the CAC when he was on there, it is kind of a expensive sport to get into. You know, not everyone could just do it, because just to get an hour of time on the ice is very costly in itself.
Oh yeah.
Annie, you did youth hockey, if I'm not mistaken, as well, correct?
I did.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys could share your experiences, like the type of money that like went into that between you, Gio, doing in Canada, where you were playing for a public school, versus Annie, where you had to actually go out of your way to pursue it.
I will say, you're bringing it up, talking about high school hockey, and my youngest brother actually just graduated from high school playing high school hockey in Southern California. And a big part, absolutely, speaking of COVID, actually, he graduated in the Petco Park parking lot, and everyone was in cars. Wow. So if we're thinking about a parade, there could be like a possibility of like a rally or something. But anyway, and I just have to give a shout out to, for one, the Ducks have done an impeccable job growing the game in Southern California. They built rinks all the way from San Diego up to the very tip of Orange County, just before it gets into Kings territory. I think in San Diego, they just rebuilt one kind of out west, but I believe there's around 4 or 5 accredited Ducks hockey rinks just in San Diego County by itself. So, you know, the Ducks are obviously putting a lot of money. They know that to grow the game, you got to start at the youth level. And going actually east to Pittsburgh, because I did an internship with youth and amateur hockey for the Penguins. Sidney Crosby is a huge face as far as growing the game in Allegheny County. He actually has a program called Little Penguins where he buys equipment for kids ages 7 through 9. And this is full on just free. We're talking helmet, pads, stick, skates, everything. As far as, you know, players getting involved and teams getting involved, it's so crucial. Because like you said, it's not a cheap sport to do. It's why of me and my 4 brothers, the only guy that was able to play goalie was the youngest, specifically because of the cost and the amount of, you know, obviously the pads, the sticks. I mean, everything goes into it. Plus, when you start doing travel, ice time, you know, there's 3 practices a week you have to pay for ice for. It adds up. So you are spot on there. You do have to start at the youth level as far as growing the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just jump in here. I'll give my perspective being in Canada. So I played youth hockey, minor hockey, what they call here, since I was 6. I played at the AAA level. So I'm not sure how it works in the United States, but that would technically be the highest level of minor hockey you can get here. So I did that all the way from the age of 6, 7 to my draft year for the Ontario or the Canadian Junior Hockey League, when that was up until 16, 17. Every year, if you're playing AAA hockey here in Canada, no matter where you're from in Canada, you're looking at a team budget anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 Canadian. So a little bit less for in American dollars, but that doesn't even cover travel costs. So the furthest like we had to go from where I'm located would be like an hour drive. You'd have to play like on a weekday at 8 o'clock at night. And then you got to go to school the next day. You're playing 2 games a week, maybe 3. You're on the ice 6 out of the 7 days a week. Like you said, equipment, because I was on the ice 5 or 6, 7 days a week, I needed the best pair of skates. I was willing, or my parents were willing to, and I'm very thankful, were willing to spend the $600-700 for new skates every year, because well, you needed that. You're playing all the time. And then they're paying for gas. They're paying for hotels for tournaments. There were some rinks here in Canada where you got to have to pay a little bit extra, where it's not part of the town or the city. It doesn't come with the budget in the beginning. So it's that. So you're looking $8,000-9,000 Canadian every year to play organized hockey. And there's so much politics involved with parents. Like they take it so seriously here. And it's like how it has to be done in the US. It starts at the grassroots level. If you can get programs in, and just like you mentioned with Sidney Crosby out in California, that kind of stuff, that's where it starts. You get kids involved young. You hopefully can get them hooked. But man, it's quickly turned into one of the most expensive sports to play, strictly just equipment wise. If you want to be good and have a chance, you got to play 24/7. You got to play in the summer. In the US, it might be harder to find ice time in the summer. Here in Canada, there are programs going constantly. It really starts at the grassroots system, but I was in it for like 15 years. I went to camps for junior hockey and stuff like that. And man, they must take it seriously like they take football and stuff with the high school. Like I've always been jealous being a Canadian. When I was in high school and I used to see like American schools with their football and they get like 10,000, they got these stadiums. I'm like, man, why can't we be that passionate about anything? Like the most we had for high school hockey games was like maybe 100, 200 guys in the stands. And that's pretty cool, but I want a full stadium.
You want that Friday Night Lights, Dillon, Texas type vibe.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's a grassroots thing, man. It starts when you're little and it comes all the way through. And Austin Matthews, I've heard him say here in Toronto, his uncle had season tickets to the Phoenix Coyotes, and he used to take them all the time. And just by him watching, that's how he got involved in the game. So it's little things like that.
You got to get him a hook, but teach him not to get in trouble for hooking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't even touch the guy in the NHL anymore now. So
this is true,
especially not with COVID-19.
Yeah,
6 feet apart, guys. 6 feet apart.